How do we build bridges across divides in times of deep polarization and fear? In this conversation, Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum, psychologist, educator, and former president of Spelman College, joins me to talk about courageous conversations, the promise of higher education, and why affirming every student's identity is essential for our future. Welcome back, my friends, to the Derate The Hate podcast. I'm your host, Wilk Wilkinson, your blue-collar sage, calming outrage and helping to navigate a world divided by fog and those who would spread that fear, outrage, and grievance. The Derate The Hate podcast is proudly produced in collaboration with Braver Angels, America's largest grassroots, cross-partisan organization working towards civic renewal. This podcast amplifies the mission that we share to foster a more respectful and united America where civic friendship thrives even when we disagree. Each week, through the power of story, conversation, and connection with incredible guests, we work to build bridges instead of barriers. Not to change minds on the issues, but to change how we see one another when we differ. Because, friends, it really is about bettering the world one attitude at a time. We did not create the hate, but together we can derate the hate. So be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, share it with a friend, and visit braverangels.org to learn how you can get involved in the movement to bridge the partisan divide. Friends, I am so incredibly grateful that you have joined me for another powerful Derate the Hate episode. So let's get to it. My guest today is Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum, President Emerita of Spelman College and one of the nation's leading voices on race, education, and leadership. During her 13 years as Spelman's 9th president, Dr. Tatum's visionary leadership was recognized with the Carnegie Academic Leadership Award. She is also the recipient of the American Psychological Association's Award for Outstanding Lifetime Contribution to Psychology. The author of 4 influential books, including the New York Times bestseller, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? Dr. Tatum continues to shape national conversations on identity, inclusion, and the future of higher education. Her latest book, Peril and Promise, Higher Education Leadership in Turbulent Times, tackles urgent questions facing college leaders today, from free speech and DEI debates to campus safety and the very viability of higher education. It is an honor for me to welcome Dr. Beverly Tatum to the Derate the Hate podcast. Here we go. Dr. Beverly Tatum, thank you so much for joining me here on the Derate the Hate podcast today. It's great to see you.
It's my pleasure to be here, Wilk. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Yes. When I first saw the press release for your book, Dr. Tatum, I saw one thing that stood out to me, and you talk about courageous conversations are needed to bridge today's societal divides, and it resonated so much with me because of the work that I do with Braver Angels, and one of the things we often speak about is courageous connections across the divides and how important it is to listen to those that we disagree with. So it really did resonate with me, and I wanted to speak with you because of that, and I'm grateful for you being here today. Now that I know that was in reference to one of your latest books that you've got coming out, Peril and Promise, and we'll get to that. But I want to step back for the beginning of our conversation, and I know a lot of what you have done in your body of work prior to now, and still now, I'm certain, but it is talk about race and the psychology of racism and things like that. And as I was kind of looking at your work, Beverly, I saw that you had done a book a number of years back called Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? And I think that's kind of a play on self-segregation. So can you start our conversation with that book and kind of what the inspiration for that was?
Sure. Well, that title is a long title, and I'm just going to repeat it in its entirety, which is Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria and Other Conversations About Race? And the reason why the second half of the title is important is because really the book is about understanding race, how it has been used and defined in our society, and how that translates into racism, and what that means for how we view ourselves and other people. So I'm a psychologist, and I write a lot about identity development and thinking about racial identity development in a race-conscious society is something that a lot of teens of color in particular do. And when they start to sit together in the cafeteria, and the Black kids or the Asian kids or the Latino kids, or so when those kids are sitting together in the cafeteria, it's usually a manifestation of their identity development in response to the messages they're getting in society about who they are, who they should be, what those stereotypes might be. And as they're trying to figure all that stuff out, they look for the company of others who are also asking those questions. So it's understandable why they might sit together in the cafeteria, particularly during the high school years or into college. But also the book is not only about understanding that phenomenon, but also how racism operates and ultimately what we can do to interrupt that cycle so that we might all be more able to embrace each other as human beings.
Yeah, and I think that's hugely important, and I want to get a little bit deeper into that, because when we think about identity formation or identity development, and what quite often, in my opinion or in my experience, has led to a lot of the identity politics and the labeling and things like that. So can you talk a little bit more about I guess the psychological impacts of identity formation or identity development, and I guess how we can, as a society, better embrace identity development, but not allow that to become such an ugly thing later on when it comes to identity politics and labeling and stereotypes and things like that.
Yes. Well, again, I'm a psychologist, and so I think about things in psychological terms. We all have multiple identities. And what do I mean by that? I mean that we all understand things about ourselves and who we are. But the question I used to ask when I taught Introduction to Psychology, and I would ask my students on the first day of class to fill in this sentence. I'm just going to ask you to think about it for a moment. If I gave you a fill in the blank sentence and it started, I am fill in the blank, and asked you to write in as many different words as you could think of in, let's say, 60 seconds. You might write things like, I am tall. You might write, I am white. You might write, I'm a man. You might write, I'm a dad. I'm a brother. I am hungry. You could put any number of things. Some of those things might have to do with temporary states, like I'm tired or I'm hungry but I'm bored, but which you might get in a classroom of students. But the things some of those words would be related to your relationships with people. I'm a son, I'm a father, I'm a employee. But some of those words will be about characteristics you have all the time. I am tall, I'm smart, I'm white, whatever you might put about yourself. So the question is, of the thousands and thousands of descriptors you might have put on the list, why did you put the particular things you put? It has to do with what has been reflected back to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our identities are in some ways a mirror of what people have told us we are. So if I grew up thinking that I was a good reader, it was because people were always commenting on my ability to read well, right? If someone said, I have two sons and one of them is particularly tall. When he was 7, people said, you're tall for your age. And I was sitting with him one day and a man asked him how old he was. He was 7. And the man was about to say, you're tall for your age. And my son said, I know, don't say it. I'm tall for my age, right? That feedback we get. Now, you might say, well, people don't walk around saying you're white, you're black, you're Asian, you're Latino, but in some ways they do, right? If
Yep.
I, as a black woman, go shopping and the shopkeeper starts to follow me around, but is not following the white people around, something about that interaction has to do with me. It's
Yep.
not because I'm a good reader. It's because a
Probably not.
person is perceiving me in a particular way and has a stereotype perhaps about black shoppers, and that is triggering that behavior. My point simply is that what we think about ourselves and the things we pay attention to are often shaped by the feedback we get from the people around us. So I could describe myself, and did, as a black woman. I could describe myself as someone who grew up middle class. I could describe myself as a vegetarian. I could describe myself as two-legged. I am two-legged. But that's not an identity I think about much, to be honest. If I was temporarily or permanently impaired by a disability, lost a leg through illness or something, I would certainly be thinking about my identity as a person who has only one leg. It would impact my life daily in terms of how I got around, all of those things. So when we think about why identity develops, it's not the person by him or herself who's developing that identity. It's being developed in the context of social relationships. In a race-conscious society, people pay attention to their racial group membership because other people are paying attention to it.
And that makes a lot of sense. And I think, just like so many other topics, Beverly, this is one of those things that people oversimplify. They oversimplify, and they just simply say, oh, well, the whole identity thing, and I'm probably guilty of this myself, to be quite honest, because it does get frustrating sometimes when people focus so much on identity and not the great pieces of people's identity. And because, like you said, it's a multifaceted thing. There's plenty of things that contribute to one's identity, but it seems like especially different power structures want to focus on or use whatever aspect of a person's identity that is going to benefit them, not the person whose identity they're talking about. And it becomes frustrating, but I think it's an oversimplified thing. And I think the explanation that you just provided is so important, because it definitely helps people to, or at least for me, it helps to better understand the complexity of something that people often oversimplify.
Yes. One of the things I write about in my new book, Peril and Promise, College Leadership in Turbulent Times, is the importance of leaders understanding the need to affirm identities of the students who are coming to the school. I just want to give an example of that, and might help listeners think, well, why does this matter? But let's imagine you and I are in a group photograph. A bunch of people, there's maybe 50 people in a room, and a photographer is going to take a picture of all of us together. And then each of us is going to get a copy of that photograph. There's one thing that each of us is going to do. We're all going to do the same thing, which is we're going to look at that photograph and try to find ourselves in it, right? That's the first thing we're going to do. I'm going to look for myself and see where I am, and then I'm going to evaluate how I look. Are my eyes open? Was I smiling? All of those things. Each of us would be doing some version of that. But let's imagine that in that group of 50, 10% of us were digitally removed from the photograph. So that 10%, 5 out of 50, are looking for themselves in the picture and not finding themselves. They have been removed. They were there. When the picture went off, they were captured. But through modern technology, they've been removed from the picture. At first, they would say, what's wrong with this picture? I was there. How come I'm not visible? But if it happened over and over and over again, every time removed from the picture, after a while, they wouldn't say, what's wrong with this picture? They'd say, what's wrong with me? How come I'm never included? Why am I always being left out? And when we talk it in educational settings, about how we create spaces where students can thrive. Of course, I'm talking about at the college level, but the same is true K through 12. We need to see ourselves reflected in the curriculum, in the classrooms, in the environment. When we step into a workplace or a classroom, it's like entering into a photograph. And if we're never included, we start to feel invisible. And when we feel invisible, we feel unmotivated, disengaged. From a student retention point of view, you're not likely to want to linger in places where you've been made to feel invisible. So, thinking about how we affirm the identity of not just some of our students or some of our employees, but everyone, I think is a leadership characteristic, a leadership skill that is really important to think about.
Yeah, it absolutely is important, and this is one of those things where, and we can take the conversation a little bit deeper into the whole concept of DEI, and I think that's something, if I'm not mistaken, that's something that you talk about in Peril to Promise, and the importance of leadership, and how, especially in terms of college presidents, which you were for a very long time. The whole thing about how secondary education or post-secondary education is in pretty dire straits right now. It's being attacked from many different fronts. But let's talk a little bit more then, Beverly, about the inclusivity thing. I think now, at least from my perspective, I think a lot of people don't have problems with diversity. They may have problems with diversity for diversity's sake, and then if like diversity of thought is excluded, but diversity based on immutable characteristics is the only thing that you're looking for diversity in, that's where I think there's a problem on that front. The equity thing, definitely there's an issue there, but then inclusivity, I think inclusivity is hugely important, and I think most people that I know think inclusivity is hugely important. So can we break that down a little bit deeper then, the diversity part? What's, from your perspective, Beverly, what is the ugliness of DEI, and how is it often misperceived?
Well, I think, I'm not sure I would call it the ugliness, but the misperception of DEI goes back to how we use language. I want to start with the word diversity. I have had the experience of hearing people refer to people of color as diverse individuals, right? Like I came into the room and there wasn't much diversity. There were just a few diverse individuals. When people use the language like that, I think it's a misuse, because of course, all of us, no matter what you look like, who you are, we all contribute to diversity. So if you walk into a room, there's 100% diversity, right? Because everyone is participating.
Yes.
But I think many people have learned to use diversity language as shorthand or code for talking about minority groups. I'm going to put minority in quotes here. So whether those minority groups, people of color or LGBTQ folks or first-gen students or whatever the category is that is often seen as on the margins, people will use the word diversity to refer to those folks. And the folks that are seen as more majority or mainstream or more fully represented as, quote, non-diverse. But of course, that doesn't make sense if we understand the true meaning of the word diversity. But the reason I take the time to talk about it, the misuse of the term, is because for a lot of people, when they hear DEI, for a lot of white people, when they hear DEI, they think that's about other people. They don't feel included in the conversation. They feel like if someone has a DEI program, it means they're trying to get more people of color, or they're trying to bring in more LGBTQ folks, or maybe more women of all backgrounds. And if you're white and male, let's say, you feel left out of that conversation. But in fact, which is one of the reasons why I prefer to talk about affirming identity, because everybody has an identity and everybody wants to feel affirmed in it. Yeah. So when we think about that, it's not just about this group or that group, it's about everyone. How do we make sure that everyone is included in the photograph, in ways that make them feel good about themselves and the institution. That's the A. And in some ways, it's broader. The D didn't have to be so narrow, but it has been talked about in that way and has become, I think, a narrow term. Incorrectly, but nonetheless, that's where we are.
Yeah.
The equity, I'm very comfortable with the term equity and prefer it to inequity. And those who say they don't want equity need to explain to me why they want inequity. I'll just leave that there.
Okay.
And the same with inclusion. If you don't want inclusivity, then it suggests to me you're looking for exclusivity. And again, what's the value of that if we want to maximize the benefit of everyone's talents in our environment? So I talk about, as I said, and write at some length in my book about affirming identity, building community, and cultivating leadership. And the building community is really important if we are part of an organization, whether it's a college or a business, a corporation, a classroom. We want everyone to be rowing in the same direction. We're all working toward the same goal. And how do we get people to feel like they're part of that shared goal? Well, they don't feel part of the shared goal if you've left them out, if you've made them invisible. So the A, affirming identity, is as an essential part of building community. And particularly at the college level in higher education, helping students and faculty staff, helping all of us improve our skills at the A and the B is leadership development. Because in order to be an effective leader in the 21st century, you need to be able to engage with people different from yourself. You need to be able to, even if you don't speak the same language, you need to be able to sit and try to understand where someone else is coming from in order to lead effectively. And that takes practice. And so in a learning environment like a higher education, you can create those opportunities for practice so that students are graduating with the leadership capacity we are going to need going forward.
Yeah. And that's so hugely important. As somebody who's been a leader for a number of years and trained other leaders and things, Beverly, one of the things that I always think about when I think about a leader, somebody who's a leader versus just somebody who's a manager or whatever, is being able to provide that environment for all the people who you are leading to succeed. And it's not just about making sure some people succeed. A true leader is going to make sure that everyone is succeeding. Because again, going back to your statement about making sure that everybody is rowing in the same direction, right? It's hugely important that nobody is left behind in that sense. So I think when you talk about people feeling invisible and not feeling like they are actually part of that greater goal, one of the things that I just keep on thinking about is the concept of synergy and how the only real way for us all to flourish and succeed as I don't care whether it's a family, if it's a community, if it's our nation as a whole, is for everybody to understand that we as individuals can come together and be part of something greater than the sum of its parts. But in order to do that, Beverly, and I think it's hugely important, and it can't be overstated, is the fact that everybody has to feel like they're part of that photograph, right?
Yes.
They have to be able to do that. And I want to take this in the direction of the importance of conversations, the importance of listening and making sure that those people that we are having a conversation with are feeling heard. That's a huge part of what we do at Braver Angels. It's a huge part of what I try to do with this podcast and all of the things that I do in this kind of mission to better the world one attitude at a time. So talk to me, Beverly, about conversation and the importance of listening and how that to get all our boats and all our people rowing in the same direction, the importance of listening and conversation.
Listening is critical. And I think you have really captured an essential component of bridging divides when you talk about the importance of listening. Because people who feel listened to are more willing to listen to others, right? Listening to others with sincere interest builds trust. And as people trust each other, then it's easier to work through hard things. It doesn't mean we'll all agree. We may still have very different points of view, but we can at least recognize each other's humanity and try to work through those differences. One of the things that I advocate for in my book, Peril and Promise, is intergroup dialogue, which is a particular pedagogical strategy, a teaching strategy that has been used on some campuses. It's often credited, the University of Michigan is often credited with having started the formal introduction of intergroup dialogue into the educational environment, but lots of places have taken that ball and run with it. And I think what's really compelling about creating classrooms where students are really learning how to dialogue with each other, not debate, but dialogue. And the first principle of dialogue is listening, careful listening, learning how to listen carefully. And then after they have had the chance to build up their listening skills, they engage in tough conversations about hot topics, things that people have strong opinions about, but learn how to do that in a way that continues the listening, even when triggered, as you said at the beginning, even when triggered, keep listening. And as that muscle, that listening muscle is developed, then they get better at working through difficult topics, engaging with each other on common problem solving. And doing that over the course of several weeks, over the course of a semester, is really life-changing. When you talk to young people who've had that kind of learning experience, they rave about it and talk about how they use it in their workplace, with their friends on their teams, in their families at home. Once you have that skill, no one can take it from you. And more of our students need to develop it.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, that is one of the things that, again, like I said, it cannot be overstated, because as we think about the different things, and I want to dive a little bit more into this, especially the post-secondary education thing, and how you say, again, higher education is under assault, but you also say that our university system holds the key to addressing the ignorance and division that threaten our society. Those skills, and a lot of people don't naturally have them. Just like so many things in the human condition, right? We need to be trained to be better at things that we as humans just don't naturally want to do. We want to protect ourselves, and a lot of times when we have been conditioned to believe that certain speech or certain things that are being said are violence, or we just don't want to listen. When we've determined that something is a trigger for us, our self-defense mechanism is to have our ears slammed shut, and we don't want to think about anything anymore, right? We just don't want to hear it. But the important thing is, if we're going to get beyond our problems, our common cause problems, we have to keep the conversation going. If we just go to our respective corners or stay in our own silos, growth only happens outside of our comfort zone. We have to be able to listen in order for the conversation to continue, because we may not solve that problem today, Beverly, but if we are going to solve it at any point, we have to keep the conversation going. So let's kind of round out our time here. Talk to me more about that and how that relates to Peril and Promise and the importance of universities in helping to solve those societal divisions.
Yes. Well, in Peril and Promise, as just for the benefit of your listeners, in Peril and Promise, I talk about a lot of the challenges facing higher education. Challenges like enrollment concerns, challenges like the cost of higher education, challenges like campus safety and the mental health concerns of today's students. So there are many topics that I discuss, but one of them is the need to get beyond what I'm going to call the anti-DEI fever that is sweeping the nation. Because one of the things that's happening is that legislators are trying to tell faculty what they can and cannot teach, what they can and cannot talk about. And I live in the state of Georgia, one of the places where there is a law that says that in public schools and publicly funded institutions, there should not be discussion of, quote, divisive concepts. Well, what is a divisive concept? A divisive concept might be a discussion about civil rights, because not everybody agrees about that. A divisive concept might be talking about, as we saw during the Israel-Hamas war protests on campus, your thoughts about whether you are supporting Palestine or Israel. There are lots of hot topics. That's what I'm going to call them, hot topics. That bubble up during the course of a school year that students want to talk about. I have spent much of my career teaching about the psychology of racism. There are people who would say that racism is a divisive topic. You shouldn't be talking about it. You shouldn't be teaching about it. What I talk about in the previous book, you talked about why are all the Black kids sitting together in the cafeteria, and to some extent also in Peril and Promise, is the fact that there is something I'm going to call the arc of discomfort, which is to say, when you ask students to talk about an unfamiliar set of ideas, they will experience some discomfort. That is common.
Yes.
But after they get used to having the conversation, they realize, one, they can do it. Two, it's actually pretty interesting. And three, there's benefit in talking about it with other people because collectively we can work about solving some of those taxing problems in our society. I often say it's like exercise. If you haven't been exercising for a while and then you go have a workout, your muscles are going to be sore. You're going to feel uncomfortable. And if you never exercise again, then okay, you had some uncomfortable feelings and then you didn't have them anymore. The soreness faded, but you didn't improve your health either, right?
That's right.
If you exercise and get past that initial soreness, you get stronger, your muscles get stronger, and you feel less sore, and even you start to like it. You get the runner's high or whatever it is that you're experiencing. You see the benefit of it and it feels good. In the same way, talking about some of these really painful subjects is hard at the beginning. And if you say, well, my student came home and was upset, that's possible, but come back next week and they'll feel better.
Yes.
It gets better. And so I think we have to be willing to experience some discomfort. I took statistics as a psychology student. I had to take statistics. I was uncomfortable in my statistics class, but I needed to learn it. And so I think we need to worry less about that temporary discomfort and more about the long-term benefits that come from creating the opportunity for dialogue, productive dialogue in the learning process.
That is so important. I mean, again, just another one of the many things that we've talked about today that can't be overstated is the idea that you talk about the art of discomfort. I talk about the idea that we don't grow inside our comfort zone. It's only when we step outside of our comfort zone that we can really grow. And exercising that muscle. It hurts at first. The first day after you're in the gym, you're feeling it. The second day after you're in the gym, you're really sore. But if you get back in the gym, eventually the sore muscles go away and you can do things that you couldn't do before.
Exactly.
It is so important. Dr. Beverly Tatum, this has been just an absolutely wonderful conversation. So much wisdom here, so many important things, and I know the DTH listeners are going to get a lot out of it. I appreciate your time today. The book is Peril and Promise, and people can find that book everywhere, and certainly on BeverlyDanielTatum.com. Is there any parting words that you'd like to leave the Derate the Hate listeners with today, Beverly?
I think we all need to understand how critical higher education is in the health of our nation, and it is under attack right now, but we also know that there are lots of people who benefited from it, and I hope those people will speak up and say, it mattered to me, it still matters.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Friends, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. And if there's anything in this episode that provided exceptional value to you, please make sure to hit that share button. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe to get the Derate The Hate podcast sent to your email inbox every week. We really are better together, so please take a moment to visit braverangels.org and consider joining the movement towards civic renewal and bridging our political divides. This is Wilk wrapping up for the week saying get out there, be kind to one another, be grateful for everything you've got, and remember, it's up to you to make every day the day that you want it to be. With that, my friends, I'm going to back on out of here, and we will catch you next week. Take care.